one who creates us, redeems us, and keeps us connected in relationship and love. Amen. Please be seated. Will we ever learn? This seems to be the question that gets asked all too often when we read the headlines. More people murdered in cold blood. Racism, sexism, and classism persist. And the conversations we attempt to have about them seem to be one step forward and two steps back. Throughout history, humanity continues to martyr its prophets. Only a month ago, we remembered the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are in the heart of Black History Month, a time set aside to remember the accomplishments of those deemed of less value by those in power. Our tradition is centered around one who spoke out against these self-same injustices and evils in the world in his own time. And for that, he was executed by the state, along with most of his followers. Protesters' words of change are eclipsed by rioters and go unheard by people who react out of fear rather than a desire to understand the perspectives of the protesters. In the meantime, innocent lives are taken, silent in the midst of the shouting of pundits and angry polemics. This is what Jesus speaks of in his lament for Jerusalem. On the other hand, prophets often alienate themselves from those they seek to challenge because they are either unable or unwilling to engage in open dialogue. It's hard to hear the words of challenge when there is no love in them. Blanket statements and generalized accusations are a delicious temptation that deceives us into thinking that such statements will somehow convince people of their wrongdoing. Worse still, there are many who think of themselves as prophets, yet perpetuate the hatred, fear, and violence so many prophets seek to bring an end to. I've often remarked that in the U.S., we're so busy making sure our voices are heard that no one can hear anyone because we're all shouting at each other. Will we ever learn how to communicate better? Jesus laments the unwillingness of Jerusalem to accept the messages of the prophets throughout history, himself included. Instead of listening deeply to their words and attempting to live by the law of love and justice, people continue to take the easy route and silence those pesky voices that tell them unpleasant truths about the world. It's like putting a Post-it note over your check engine light in your car in the hopes that it will somehow go away if you ignore it. Anyone ever done that? I know I have. Will we ever learn to be courageous and face our problems? Jesus also points to how he desires to show love and protection to the people of Jerusalem. The irony is that people who claim to be Christians throughout the past 2,000 years use this very passage to justify persecuting and killing Jews because they think Jesus is condemning Jews. People take the words of Paul, Matthew, and John, all Jews, to blame Jews for the death of Jesus. The Shoah, commonly referred to as the Holocaust, is in direct relation to anti-Jewish sentiments based on misinterpretation of passages like our gospel today. People die because we are unwilling to listen. Will we ever learn to slow down and listen to understand? Paul intensely encourages the Philippians to resist what we struggle with in our culture, especially these days in the Bay Area. We fall prey to the obsession with ambitious upward social movement and self-absorbed indulgences of pleasures without concern for how this impacts others. I've heard many people describe the sudden change in the past few years of the makeup of Walnut Creek from a working-class community into a posh destination town for people all over the Bay. I've also found that breaking into the Walnut Creek community is even more difficult than breaking into San Francisco. There appears to be a strong interest in making sure one either is or appears to be up with the latest fashion trends in the best physical shape possible and put on airs of superiority based on this. What's interesting about following the latest trends in fashion or achieving being in a certain financial bracket is that these traits have nothing to do with building authentic and vulnerable relationships with one another. In fact, they actually play into an ethic of competition and insecurity that divides us and isolates us from one another. Will we ever learn that our value is found in how we love one another, not the brands we wear or the power we can wield? The process of gentrification in the Bay Area continues to oust people who used to be able to afford to live here at a reasonable cost. Then we have the visible reality of homelessness that is caused to a great extent by this uptick in the cost of living. Instead of seeking to understand why homelessness has gotten this bad, I've heard people often opt to ask the police and politicians to take care of the problem. This approach to poverty was equally prevalent in the ancient world in the time of Jesus. The prophets continually tell us, take care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the alien. Will we ever learn to see the God-given dignity in every human being, even if they are not in what we consider their right mind or in presentable fashion? That said, be encouraged. As you know, St. Paul's is a place where divisions like this are not the foci. If anything, we push ourselves to the point of burnout trying to respond to the needs of our community. Our church makes significant positive difference in the lives and community of Walnut Creek. And people unrelated to any organized religion working for nonprofits in cooperation with St. Paul's address these needs as well. The very fact that we can find quotes by Jesus, JFK, MLK, and Gandhi all over the place means we are at least trying to learn from the lessons and the mistakes of our ancestors. The Walnut Creek Homelessness Task Force that meets here at St. Paul's includes police, city council members, parishioners, nonprofit representatives, local business people, and homeless people themselves, all in one cooperation to change this. This shows us that the question is not simply, will we ever learn, but more, will all of us ever learn? The reason this question continues to be asked is because it takes all of us in order to ever learn, because we are all interrelated, whether we may want to believe it or not. We live in a culture that prizes individuality over and against a sense of community. Other cultures prize the community at the expense of the individual's needs. We as Episcopalians are given the great opportunity to show how to be individuals in community. We are responsible to each other, which means that we must think about how our choices affect others. We also are each a unique, beautiful combination of hopes, fears, memories, traumas, joys, perspectives, and relationships to God and to others. It is in this intersection of caring for ourselves in conversation with caring for others that we find the genius in following Jesus. We start with the fact that we each have a God-given dignity that no one can give or take away. It is into that dignity we live and rest. According to Howard Thurman, a strong mentor to King and a huge inspiration to me, this is how Jesus managed to accomplish what he did in his life. This understanding is the principle behind Gandhi's Satyagraha, the nonviolent protest. This approach is the framework that inspired the civil rights movement under Dr. King. To even begin to follow Jesus, we must start with this dignity. Fortunately, this is a core tenet of our baptismal identity. What does it mean to be an Episcopalian? And our baptismal vows means to respect the dignity of every human being. When we are able to rest in that, it is easier to see that dignity in others, and through that lens, we are able to love others while also being willing to bring critiques to them without denigrating them. It is through this dignity we learn to listen. It is through this dignity we learn how best to bring our voices to a conversation, not a shouting match or a fight. It is through this dignity that we worry less about agreeing with one another or having the best new stuff, and worry more about how to meet each other's needs and learn from each other. It's a truly different way of understanding the world. So, will we ever learn? I don't know. But if we continue to live as individuals in community, understanding that we each have a God-given dignity, we might. We just might. And every time we do learn, we build God's kingdom together. So in what aspects of our lives, as both individuals and as a community, can we learn? What is God inviting us into through prophetic words of inspiration? Let's see if we can't all learn together from the love of God. Amen.